January 12, 1888. The morning broke warm and bright over Willowfield, Dakota Territory. After weeks of brutal cold, the settlers gave thanks. The temperature had barely climbed above freezing for what felt like forever. Snowdrifts buried fences and wore down even the toughest spirits. But this Thursday felt like a gift. The thermometer outside Doyle Pickett's land office read 6 degrees Celsius at dawn. By 9 o'clock, it had climbed past 10. Children, cooped up for weeks, went to school in light coats. Some wore no coats at all. Farmers went out to check their livestock. Women threw open their doors, letting the fresh January air sweep through rooms that had grown stale. The whole prairie seemed to breathe out. No one noticed the thin blue line on the northwestern horizon. No one, except Niels Bergstrom. He stood at the doorway of the massive sod building the town called The Grave. It sprawled like an ancient earthwork, a half-mile north of town. But Niels wasn't looking at his building. He watched the sky. The blue line grew thicker, climbing higher. It was not a cloud. It was a wall. A wall of cold so dense and violent you could see it from 80 kilometers away. A rolling curtain of black, blue, and white that swallowed the sky as it moved. Niels had seen this once before. As a boy on the coast of Norway, a polar storm had swept down from the Arctic, killing 30 fishermen in an afternoon. The old men of his village called it a death wind. He turned and walked inside. "Ingrid," he said quietly, "get the children, all of them, now." Ingrid Bergstrom didn't ask why. 14 years of marriage had taught her. Her husband did not alarm easily. When he spoke in that low, flat tone, stripped of everything but purpose, something terrible was coming. What made Niels Bergstrom so uniquely prepared for a storm that deceived everyone else? Niels Bergstrom arrived in Dakota Territory in the spring of 1882. He was 30 years old. Niels was one of thousands of Scandinavian immigrants who came to the northern plains looking for land and a future. He grew up on the Norwegian coast, a fisherman's son in a world of stone, storm, and sea. He knew cold, not as an idea, but as a living force, a force that demanded respect, a force that would kill you if you didn't take it seriously. Dakota Territory was flat. Norway was mountains. Dakota was treeless. Norway was covered in forests. Dakota was open to everything. Norway had fjords and valleys for shelter, but the cold in Dakota felt familiar. The winter wind screamed across the open prairie. It carried the same killing intent as the gales that howled across the North Atlantic. Niels knew this with the clarity of a man who had almost frozen to death when he was 16. He saw that the settlers of Dakota Territory were terribly unprepared for what winter here could truly deliver. He staked his claim on 65 hectares of treeless prairie just north of Willowfield. The filing fee was $14. The soil was good, rich, and black. It would grow wheat and flax easily. But Niels was most interested in the low rise at the center of his claim. It was a natural windbreak, a slight elevation that would shed water and provide a solid base. He had been planning a structure since his voyage from Christiania. This was the spot for it. He would build a longhouse. Not like the flimsy frame shacks American settlers put up in a season. Those had thin plank walls and gaps where the wind whistled through. Not even like the standard soddies, which more practical homesteaders built with walls a foot or two thick and roofs that leaked mud in every rain. Niels planned something his Viking ancestors would have known, a building designed from the very first stone to stand against the worst nature could throw at it. He cut the sod himself, using a breaking plow to slice the tough prairie grass into uniform bricks. Each one was 60 centimeters long, 30 centimeters wide, and 10 centimeters thick, weighing almost 23 kilograms. He laid them in overlapping courses, like a mason building with stone. The walls grew 90 centimeters thick at the base. His blue roan gelding, Slate, hauled cottonwood logs from a creek bottom 8 kilometers away. Niels chose the trees for their straightness and strength. He stripped off their bark to stop them from rotting. The construction took 2 full years. His brother Peter helped with the heavy work at first, then diphtheria took him. After Peter's death, Niels kept going alone. He rose before dawn. He worked until he could no longer see his hands in the fading light. Ingrid mixed the mortar. It was a combination of clay, grass, and water. She packed it between the courses with the same steady skill she brought to everything. The children carried water. They gathered grass. They stacked the endless bricks. The people of Willowfield watched Niels work. It was a mix of wonder and pity. Doyle Pickett, the town's land agent, was the first to speak out. Pickett was a man who had done well for himself, selling land and running the general store on credit. He wore a fine coat and a bowler hat, moving with the easy confidence of someone who held the town's purse strings. One Saturday afternoon, in his busy store, Pickett declared, "The Norwegian is building a fort. Walls 90 centimeters thick, 24 meters long, for a family of 6. He shook his head slowly, a show of theatrical disbelief. "I reckon he's expecting an Indian war, or maybe he's building his own tomb. Hard to tell the difference." The name stuck instantly. They called it the grave. Bergstrom's grave. A common greeting became, "Have you seen the grave? The Norwegian is still digging himself in. Reckon he'll pull the dirt over himself by Christmas." Even Mayor Lyle Holt, a cautious man who owed his position to Pickett, voiced his concerns. "The size of the thing is unseemly," he said. "It suggests a man who does not trust his neighbors, someone who expects the worst from his community. Such a man is not a good citizen." The women of Willowfield were just as harsh. Mrs. Pickett, who organized welcome committees for every new arrival, skipped the Bergstroms. "They keep to themselves," she explained. "They speak that foreign language. And that building, it's not Christian, it's pagan, like something the old heathens would have built." Ingrid heard the whispers when she came to town for supplies. She understood English well enough by then. Words like grave, tomb, heathen, and mad reached her ears. She reported them to Niels without emotion. Niels just set another sawed brick into place. "Let them talk," he said. "Words do not keep out the wind." Despite the ridicule, how did this pagan monstrosity actually perform when faced with the unforgiving reality of a Dakota winter? By the autumn of 1884, the longhouse was finished. No other structure on the Dakota prairie looked like it. The main hall stretched 12 meters long and 9 meters wide. Its ceiling rose to almost 3 meters at the highest point, held up by cottonwood beams as thick as a man's thigh. 2 massive stone fireplaces stood at each end. Niels built them from fieldstone, hauled 5 kilometers from a glacial deposit. He fitted the stones together with lime mortar, which he burned himself from limestone found on the open range. The floor was packed earth, hard as brick. Ingrid and Ragna covered parts of it with woven grass mats they made during the long winter evenings. The walls were the heart of the design. They were 90 centimeters thick, packed sod on the outside. Inside, Niels covered them with a layer of whitewashed plaster, a mix of lime and sand he learned to make. This massive wall captured heat from the fireplaces. Then it slowly released that heat, keeping the inside steadily warm. Thin-walled frame houses could never do that. In summer, the same heavy walls kept the interior cool. The roof was also sod, sloped and drained properly. It added another layer of insulation. The entire building breathed with the seasons. It stayed warm in winter, cool in summer, always stable. The stable wing housed Slate and the family's 2 milk cows. Their body heat helped warm the structure even more. Beneath the main hall, a heavy trapdoor opened to a root cellar. It held potatoes, turnips, dried fish, salt pork, and grain, enough food to feed the family for months without needing to go to town for supplies. The total cost for everything, the filing fee, tools, and the few materials he couldn't make or scavenge, came to $97. The next winter, 1884 to 1885, hit hard. The one after that, 1885 to 1886, was even worse. Then came the winter of 1886 to 1887. People called it the Great Die-Up. It was a disaster. Millions of cattle froze across the northern plains. Settlers in their thin-walled shacks had no defense. Families burned everything they had: furniture, fences, wagon beds, anything that would burn. They were trying to survive weeks of 40 below temperatures. It was a desperate fight, and many lost. But the Bergstrom longhouse stood firm. Its huge walls simply shrugged off the howling winds. The fireplaces, burning a small amount of cottonwood and dried buffalo chips, kept the inside warm enough. Food came from the root cellar. The stable kept the animals alive. 12 people, including 4 children under 10, spent the worst winter in Dakota history in something close to comfort. Willowfield noticed. They saw the long house stand, but the lesson didn't stick. When spring finally came, and the dead cattle were counted and the frozen settlers buried, the town rebuilt the same way they always had. Thin walls, shallow foundations. They were optimists. They believed last year's disaster wouldn't happen again. Niels watched them, but he didn't say anything. He had learned that people only hear what they want to hear. The bitter lessons of winter, he knew, were quickly forgotten on the first warm day of spring. So he kept preparing. He stacked more firewood. He made the root cellar bigger. He reinforced the roof beams. He wasn't getting ready for just another winter. He was getting ready for the one that would finally teach Willowfield what he already knew. The morning of January 12, 1888, dawned warm and bright. It felt like spring, but Niels Bergstrom knew it was a trap. He saw the horizon darken, a thin blue line growing thick in the northwest. It wasn't a cloud. It was a wall of cold, moving fast. This wasn't just another storm. History would call it the schoolhouse blizzard. A massive front of Arctic air at 40 degrees below zero slammed into the unseasonably warm air that had given the plains its false spring. The collision created a storm of instant, overwhelming violence. Around 2 in the afternoon, that wall of cold hit. The temperature plunged 40 degrees in less than 15 minutes. The wind, which had been light and from the south, suddenly reversed. It exploded out of the northwest at 95 kilometers an hour. Snow wasn't falling. It was lifted from the ground, driven horizontally with the force of sandblasting. Visibility dropped to 0 in seconds. A man couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. A child couldn't see the schoolhouse door from 3 meters away. Across Dakota Territory, Nebraska, and Kansas, the blizzard caught hundreds of thousands of people in the open. Farmers were in their fields, travelers were on the roads, cattlemen were checking their herds. And worst of all, children. Children who had been sent to school that morning in light coats. Their teachers now faced an impossible choice. Keep them in flimsy schoolhouses already losing heat, or send them into a storm that would kill them in minutes. In Willowfield, the schoolhouse stood on the south edge of town. It was a simple frame building with walls barely 10 centimeters thick. Miss Adeline Marsh, a 23-year-old teacher, had 26 children in her care when the storm struck. The building shook as if a locomotive had hit it. The windows cracked. The stove, which had been burning brightly all morning, suddenly felt useless, like a candle in a cathedral. The temperature inside the schoolhouse began to drop fast. Miss Marsh was young, but she wasn't foolish. She knew the building couldn't protect them. She knew the children wouldn't survive a walk through the storm to their homes, most scattered miles across the open prairie. She needed shelter, real shelter, something substantial. Shelter the storm could not break through. And in that moment, she thought of the grave. The question now, how could Niels possibly bring them to his distant, mocked grave with the storm raging and children trapped? Subscribe. The proof lands in the next few minutes, and it's not what she expected. Niels had already started moving. He'd seen the horizon darken. He sent Ingrid and Ragna to get the longhouse ready, fire up both hearths, draw water, bring food from the root cellar. Then he saddled Slate, the old horse, and rode south toward town. The wind was already strong enough to push a man off his feet. He reached the schoolhouse at 2 o'clock, just as the storm hit with full force. Inside, Miss Marsh had the children huddled in the middle of the room. They were wrapped in every coat and blanket she could find, singing hymns to try and keep their spirits up. The walls shook. The door bowed inward from the wind's pressure. Niels didn't waste time with greetings. "You cannot stay here," he shouted over the roar. "The building will not hold. My home is 800 meters north. We must go now while there is still time." 800 meters? Miss Marsh stared at him. "In this?" she said. "The children will be lost in seconds." "I have rope," Niels told her. He had 60 meters of it coiled over Slate's saddle. "We tie the children together. They hold the rope. I lead. You follow at the rear. No one lets go. No one." It was madness, but it was also their only chance. They tied the children in pairs, the older ones with the younger. Each pair connected to the main line with a short lead. Niels took the front. One end of the rope knotted around his waist. He leaned into the storm, Slate's bridle in one hand. Miss Marsh took the rear, the other end of the rope secured around her own waist. She counted heads by feel because she couldn't see past the child directly in front of her. Then they stepped into the blizzard. The cold hit them like a physical blow. Children screamed. Then the wind tore the sound from their mouths. The snow wasn't falling. It was flying, horizontal, a white darkness that erased the world. Niels couldn't see anything. He moved by instinct, by the slope of the ground under his feet. By the wind's direction against his face, Slate pushed forward, head down, the old horse trusting his master with the blind faith of a creature that had been through storms before. It took 40 minutes to cover that 800 meters. 40 minutes of staggering, wind-blasted, frozen progress through a void that offered no landmark, no horizon, no mercy. Twice a child fell and had to be hauled upright by the rope. Once, the whole line stopped. A 6-year-old boy named Freddie Hall, the mayor's youngest son, collapsed and couldn't stand. Niels handed Slate's bridle to the oldest boy, walked back along the line, lifted Freddie onto his shoulders, and kept marching. They reached the longhouse at 10 minutes past 3. The heavy door opened. Warmth poured out into the storm like a blessing. Ingrid and Ragna pulled the children inside, cutting the ropes. They stripped off frozen clothing, wrapped small bodies in blankets, and pressed warm cups into numb hands. The main hall with its blazing fireplaces and 90-centimeter walls was another world. Quiet, warm, safe. The storm hammered against the sod and accomplished nothing. 26 children, 1 teacher, all saved. Niels had just saved 26 children. He had brought them through a storm that should have killed them. But he wasn't done. He rested for 10 minutes, drank hot coffee, and then went back out into the white dark. The town of Willowfield was dying. The flimsy wooden buildings, built with a quick hope for easy times, were giving way. Windows blew apart, doors buckled inward, walls cracked and split under the wind's endless pounding. Families who had started the morning in light coats now faced temperatures of 30 below zero. Nothing stood between them and death but cheap lumber, never meant for such power. Niels made 4 more trips into the blizzard that afternoon and evening. Each time he followed a rope he had stretched between his longhouse and the edge of town. He brought back families, the Holts, the Sorensens, the Webbers, the Marshalls. He found old Elias Puett, the blacksmith, clinging to his anvil inside a shop that had lost its roof. He carried Doyle Pickett's wife and their 3 children. Pickett himself refused to leave his store until the front wall collapsed. Then he had no choice. By midnight, 71 people were packed inside the Bergstrom Longhouse. 71 souls in a building meant for 12. The main hall was standing room only. Children slept in layers on the floor, covered with every blanket, every coat, every piece of fabric the household owned. Adults took turns by the fireplaces, feeding the flames, keeping the heat steady. The stable wing housed not just Slate and the milk cows, but 11 other horses and 2 mules brought by the refugees. It was cramped. It was uncomfortable. It was loud. It smelled of wet wool, unwashed bodies, and fear. But the walls held. The 90 centimeters of packed sod that Willowfield had mocked for 4 years shrugged off the hurricane winds. They did not move. The stone fireplaces, built by a man who understood fire was not a luxury but a necessity, burned steadily through the night. The root cellar provided food for everyone. The longhouse, that pagan monstrosity, that grave, that tomb, did exactly what Niels Bergstrom had built it to do. It endured. The blizzard raged for 18 hours. When it finally stopped on the morning of January 13th, the survivors stepped out of the longhouse into a world scraped clean by the wind. The snow wasn't deep. The wind had been too fierce to let it pile up, but the cold was otherworldly. Exposed skin froze in less than a minute. The air itself seemed to crack. What would they see when they looked back at Willowfield, and how would this experience finally change their perception of Niels and his grave? The storm finally broke on the morning of January 13th. Survivors stepped out of the longhouse into a world scoured clean. They looked south toward Willowfield. The sight silenced them. The town was a wreck. Roofs ripped away. Walls caved in. The schoolhouse where 26 children sang hymns the day before was now a pile of broken wood. Its stove lay buried under debris. If Miss Marsh had kept the children there, they would have been crushed or frozen or both. Doyle Pickett's general store had lost its entire front wall. Flour, coffee, bolts of cloth, tools, tobacco, everything was scattered across the frozen prairie. It looked like a shipwreck. Mayor Holt's house fared little better. His family survived only because Niels had come for them. The mayor's youngest son, Freddie, the boy who collapsed on the march, slept peacefully in the longhouse. He had warm broth in his belly. Color returned to his cheeks. Across the northern plains, the numbers were devastating. 235 people died in the schoolhouse blizzard. Many were children. Children sent to school in light coats on a warm morning. Children whose teachers made the impossible choice to send them home through the storm. Children found frozen within sight of their own doorsteps. But in Willowfield, not a single soul was lost. 71 people had survived inside the building they called a grave. The town gathered 3 days later. The cold had eased enough for people to speak without their words freezing in the air. They met inside the longhouse. There was no other building in Willowfield large enough, or still standing, to hold them. Doyle Pickett asked to speak first. He stood before the assembly in borrowed clothes. His own wardrobe lay scattered across a quarter-mile of frozen prairie. His broadcloth coat was gone. His bowler hat was gone. The easy authority he once wore was gone too. Something raw, something unfinished had taken its place. 4 years ago, he said, his voice rough, I stood in my store. I called this building a grave. I said Niels Bergstrom was building his own tomb. I made the jest. This town laughed with me. We went on laughing while this man built the only structure in Willowfield that could survive what we just lived through. He stopped. His jaw worked, but no words came for a moment. My children are alive because of this building. My wife is alive. I am alive. And I spent 4 years mocking the man who made it possible. He turned to Niels. Mr. Bergstrom, I have been a vain and foolish man. I laughed at what I could not understand. I encouraged others to laugh with me. You owed me nothing. You owed this town nothing. And yet you walked into that storm 5 times. 5 times. You brought us to safety. He bowed his head. I have no words worthy of what you did. I can only say that I was wrong, and that I am grateful, and that I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve what you gave us. Mayor Holt rose next. His voice shook, and not from the cold. My boy Freddie would be dead, he said simply. Frozen on the prairie, between the schoolhouse and a home that could not have protected him even if he had reached it. Mr. Bergstrom carried my son on his shoulders through a storm that would have killed a grown man. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I called this building unseemly. I questioned the character of the man who built it. I was a fool. My foolishness nearly cost me my child. Miss Marsh spoke. The schoolteacher, whose courage in the storm matched Niels's own, stood before the assembly. Her composure was quiet, like a woman who had faced death and found it wanting. I had 26 children in my care, she said. 26 children in a schoolhouse made of sticks. When the storm hit, I had nothing to offer them but hymns and hope. Mr. Bergstrom offered them something better. He offered them walls that would hold. The town finally understood, but what was Niels's own philosophy, and what lasting impact would this event have on Willowfield? When the speeches ended, Niels Bergstrom slowly stood. He had been sitting in a chair tucked away in the corner, far from the crowd. He wasn't a man who liked to give speeches. His English still sounded Norwegian, and he picked his words carefully. like someone building something meant to last. In Norway, he said, his voice a little rough, we have a word, dugad. He paused, letting the foreign sound hang in the air. It means work done together for the good of all. He looked around the room. I didn't build this house by myself. He talked about his brother Peter, who had laid the first stones before he died. He spoke of his wife Ingrid and his sister Ragna, who mixed the mortar. He mentioned his children, who carried water until their arms ached. Everyone had played a part. He told them why the walls were so thick. I know what winter can do, he said. I have seen it kill. I have felt its hand on my own throat. He spoke of the prairie wind. When you build thin, you are trusting the weather to be kind. The weather is never kind. It is not cruel either. It simply is what it is, and we must build accordingly. Then he looked at all the faces watching him. You are welcome in this house, he said. You have always been welcome. The walls don't know who mocked them and who didn't. They only know how to stand. The rebuilding of Willowfield took 2 years. The town that rose from the snow was different. Niels guided them. 17 new sod buildings went up, each with thick walls and strong foundations, just like the longhouse had proven. Frame houses got sod piled up against their sides. Every home now had a root cellar dug deep underground. Willowfield would never again be caught between the wind and a prayer. Doyle Pickett rebuilt his store. Its walls were 45 centimeters thick. It cost him twice what the first one had, but he never complained about the money. He also started selling rope in 30-meter coils. After that, every family in Willowfield had a lifeline, a rope strung between their house and their barn. Miss Adeline Marsh kept teaching in Willowfield for another 12 years. She married a rancher in 1900, but she never forgot that 40-minute walk through the storm. She kept a piece of the rope, the same rope that had connected 26 children to life, in a glass case on her mantle, until the day she died. The phrase, building like Bergstrom, soon spread across the Dakota settlements. It meant building for the worst possible conditions, not just the average. It meant respecting winter's power instead of simply trying to survive it. People spoke the words with the deep understanding of those who had learned their meaning the hard way. Niels and Ingrid Bergstrom raised their children in that long house. Their grandchildren grew up there too. The structure stood for 63 years. It was finally taken down in 1947 to make room for a modern farmhouse. By then, the sod walls were as hard as concrete. The demolition crew said the building fought against being destroyed, with the same stubbornness as the man who built it. Today, where the longhouse once stood, there is a small stone marker. The grandchildren of the 71 survivors placed it there. They gathered on the 100th anniversary of the blizzard to remember what happened and to honor the man who saved them. The inscription is in 2 languages. In English, it reads, "Here stood the house that held." Beneath it, in Norwegian, are 3 words, "Vegan store. The wall stands." Niels would have preferred the Norwegian. The morning of January 12, 1888, broke warm and golden over Dakota territory. That deceptive calm was answered by the enduring legacy of a man who saw past it. He built for true resilience. The real measure of wisdom is not in expecting average conditions. It is in preparing for the catastrophic extremes. Subscribe if this kind of story is your thing. I find one of these every few weeks. And drop a comment. What old technique do you think we've forgotten that still has a use nobody's seen yet?